Hello, I'm Evelyn. I'm 42, a mom, a spouse, and someone who never imagined she'd lose herself in such a quiet, devastating way. How did a simple day at the beach with my son turn into a decision I can't undo? How does isolation twist into something barely recognizable until it's too late? If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever pondered how a heart can shatter silently, stay with me. Hear my story and tell me, have you ever encountered emotional limits you weren't ready for? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. 2 years have passed since the day my life started to change. I am Evelyn, 42 years old, a spouse, a mother, and gradually a woman who had lost sight of herself. My marriage to David, my husband, was once the simple dream I held dear. After over 15 years together, we created a peaceful home and raised two wonderful children. Lucas, 16 years old, and Ella, our little girl, whose laughter used to fill the house. From the outside, people would say I had it all, but there are voids that others can't see. David became increasingly occupied with work. Late meetings, long business trips, hurried apologies. At first, I told myself he was doing it all for the family. But as the years passed, those reassurances no longer soothed the emptiness growing inside me. Dinners often lacked David's presence. When he was there, he merely skimmed through the meals with routine questions. Have you finished your homework? I have an early flight tomorrow. I became a silent shadow holding together a family that barely noticed I was there. Many nights I sat alone in the dark living room, listening to the ticking of the clock, asking myself, does he even truly see me anymore? Sometimes I watched David sleep beside me, the dim light from the bedside lamp highlighting the fine lines around his eyes. He had changed, and maybe so had I. Neither of us reached out to touch, to listen, or even to look at each other the way we once did. I gradually learned to endure. I kept my smile as I took Ella to school. I tended to the house out of habit. I still talked to Lucas on the days he was willing to open up, but inside, little pieces of me were quietly shattering. I once believed I was strong enough to live with that neglect. Until one morning when David hurriedly packed his luggage and left behind the familiar words, "I'm sorry, I have to leave on a sudden business trip." And as always, I just silently nodded, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat. That day, I decided to take Lucas on a trip to the beach. A plan that was originally meant for the whole family, but now was just the two of us. I thought the sea breeze and the sunlight would help me forget the emptiness. But I was wrong. It was right there on the white sands under the blazing sun that I began to confront the deep cracks inside myself. Cracks I had pretended not to see for so many years. That morning, the sky was strangely clear. The small suitcase was neatly packed in the car trunk, and Ella chirped her goodbyes to me and her brother before heading off to stay at Grandma's house. Only Lucas and I remained. A beach trip I had once hoped would be a chance to bring the family closer, but David was busy as always. "We're still going, right, Mom?" Lucas asked, his eyes a mix of anticipation and hesitation. I smiled, masking the sting rising in my chest. "Of course we are, sweetheart," I said, gently patting Lucas on the shoulder. Throughout the drive to the beach, Lucas sat beside me, wearing his headphones and staring out the window. His face showed traces of maturity I hadn't noticed before. Over the past years, I had been so consumed with worrying about David, so busy enduring the growing emptiness that I had forgotten how quickly my little boy had grown. There was a slight awkwardness, a trace of unfamiliarity lingering between us, as if both of us were cautiously trying to rediscover the old rhythm of mother and son. I glanced at Lucas, a wave of tenderness swelling in my chest. My son? He's grown so tall already. Part of me wanted to break the silence, to ask him hundreds of questions about school, about friends, about all the things he was holding in his growing heart. But the words caught in my throat. When we arrived at the beach, golden sunlight stretched out like a shimmering carpet across the sand. The salty breeze caressed my cheeks, whispering, "Let go. Forget the sadness." Lucas quickly set up the small beach umbrella and spread the towels on the sand. I smiled at him, my heart filling with a bittersweet mixture of love and regret. Maybe just for today I would allow myself to forget everything. I laid back on the towel, closed my eyes, and let the warm sunlight wash over my weary body. A voice inside me whispered, "Enjoy it, Evelyn. Just this once." Lucas sat down beside me, playing with the sand, occasionally stealing glances at me. The distance between us at that moment was so small and yet somehow still vast. I had thought this trip was simply an escape from David's coldness, but I didn't know then that here under the radiant sun and the soothing sound of the waves, a fragile boundary between loneliness and silent yearning would begin to blur. The afternoon sunlight softened, painting the sandy beach a honey gold hue. I gently turned on the long towel, feeling the salty sea breeze caressing my skin. "Lucas, can you help me apply sunscreen?" I spoke gently without a second thought, simply because my back was starting to burn and on this vast beach there were only the two of us. Lucas, the 16-year-old son with deep brown eyes and naturally tousled hair, hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, Mom," he replied softly. I lay face down, pulling my hair to one side, exposing my bare back to the soft sunlight. Lucas took the cream, his clumsy fingers applying thin layers onto my shoulders. His first move was slow and cautious, so much so that I couldn't help but chuckle softly. "You can be a bit firmer," I reassured, still keeping my tone gentle. Lucas smiled awkwardly, then complied. His hand was warm, slightly trembling, but also very careful. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to relax, enjoying that innocent care. And then Lucas hesitated awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, unsure how to apply the sunscreen. Lucas awkwardly spread sunscreen on my shoulders, carefully avoiding going too low, respectful of boundaries. I froze for a moment. A part of me screamed, "Stop it, Evelyn." But another part, the weak part that I had hidden for so many lonely years, craved that tenderness to the point of desperation. Lucas stopped, as if waiting for a reaction. I opened my eyes, locking gazes with him. Those eyes were no longer the gaze of a small boy needing protection. They were the eyes of a boy inquiring, yearning to be trusted. I didn't say anything. I also didn't get up, just lying there in silence, letting that moment hang between the two of us. Fragile, dangerous, and nameless. The sea breeze still blew. The waves still crashed against the shore regularly. But inside me, a small crack had split wide open. And Evelyn, the 42-year-old wife of a perpetually absent man, realized that I was standing on the fragile boundary between emotional need and familial responsibility. And from here, I knew everything would never be the same again. That evening, the atmosphere in the house was suffocatingly quiet. Lucas had gone to his room early while I wandered between the living room and the kitchen, not knowing what to do except continuously wash my hands and clean. I kept thinking about Lucas's careful gestures, his awkward kindness reminding me how distant we had become. Every time I closed my eyes, I could clearly feel his palm gliding over my skin like an indelible mark. I blamed myself. I told myself it was just an accident, a fleeting moment of loneliness and exhaustion. But deep down, I knew I didn't stop it. When the clock was nearing midnight, I sat on the sofa, the dim yellow light casting a gentle glow on the silent walls. I was contemplating what to do when the sound of stealthy footsteps echoed from the stairs. Lucas, in a loose t-shirt and sports pants, appeared at the doorway. The dim light made his face half bright, half dark, further highlighting the mix of confusion and determination. "Mum, you're not asleep yet?" Lucas asked, whispering. I was startled. "No, I can't sleep," he said. He hesitated to come closer, then sat down just a short distance from me. No one said another word. Only the sound of the clock ticking steadily and the gentle breath of the spring night mist outside the window remained. He was looking at me. The gaze was no longer carefree as before. That was a searching gaze, something greater, more complex. I turned my face away, my palm clenched tightly. "You should go to sleep, Lucas." I tried to keep my voice calm, but instead of getting up, he whispered, "Mom, You know today something is different, right? I closed my eyes tightly. Don't ask. Don't make me say it. But he persisted, each word careful yet full of determination. I don't want you to feel alone anymore. I opened my eyes and caught that gaze, a gaze that made my heart tighten with fear and an intense emotional vulnerability that I had never admitted to myself. Lucas quietly reassured me, sitting nearby, and a small gesture, but enough to make all my reason waver. We looked at each other for a moment longer, then I stood up abruptly, almost running towards the stairs. "Good night, my child," I said, my voice trembling, not daring to turn back. Behind me, Lucas said nothing, only silence. The heavy, dense silence signaling that the fragile boundary between us had cracked once again. I thought from now on, every silence and glance between us would feel heavy with unspoken pain and misunderstanding, highlighting our shared isolation. No matter how accidental, it would all contain an unfathomable power that I found hard to resist. I closed the door behind me and leaned against the cold wood. The darkness in the room seemed to thicken, wrapping around me with a nameless anxiety. I gasped for air as if I had just escaped something far greater than myself. No one was small in this story anymore. Not me, not Lucas. I collapsed onto the bed, my eyes wide open in the dark. Everything I had ever believed in, marriage, duty, motherhood, was crumbling inside me, piece by piece. Our interactions had become emotionally difficult and complicated, filled with confusion. I shut my eyes, trying to push the feeling away. But memories of that afternoon on the beach, of the timid first touches, of Lucas's genuine concern stayed with me, reminding me how deeply I'd missed emotional connection. All of it swarmed me mercilessly. A soft knock sounded. I didn't need to open my eyes to know who it was. I lay still, pretending to sleep, hoping Lucas would leave. But the door creaked open and I heard the sound of bare feet stepping into the room. The bed dipped slightly as he sat at the edge. Silence enveloped us, pushing my senses once again to their limits. "Mom," Lucas's voice was hoarse, as if he was fighting with himself. I turned away, panicking, pulling the blanket higher, a fragile shield between us. "Lucas, you need to go back to your room," I whispered, my voice trembling and choked. "Just a minute," he whispered, almost pleading. "Just let me stay here." I shook my head, tears spilling helplessly. "No, we can't. This is a mistake. A mistake, Lucas." Yet he touched me. Didn't force anything. He just sat there, a living reminder of the emptiness I had tried so hard to bury all these years. "Mom, do you know?" Lucas said softly, his voice breaking. "I've never seen anyone as sad as you." I clenched my fists under the blanket. "Don't say more. Don't see the pain I didn't even want to admit to myself." "You've spent your whole life for others," Lucas continued, almost talking to himself. "But who has ever spent their life looking at you?" I burst into tears, sobs breaking through the dark room. I hated myself for being so weak, hated that a part of me wanted to cling to that rare warmth. "Lucas, you have to go," I sobbed. "Please." He stood up slowly, as if each step weighed him down. Before leaving, Lucas paused at the door. "I'm sorry," he said, "for making you feel guilty just for being loved." The door closed behind him, and once again I was left alone in the darkness, facing the fiercest storm of all, the storm within myself. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, but I still couldn't summon the strength to get out of bed. I hadn't slept all night. Everything inside me was tangled like a ball of knotted thread that couldn't be unraveled. I heard the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Lucas was making breakfast as if nothing had happened. I sat up, burying my face in my trembling hands. How could we ever go back to the way things were? How could I look Lucas in the eye, look David in the eye, look Ella in the eye when I had crossed a line there was no returning from? I forced myself to stand. Every step felt like I was dragging heavy stones. In the mirror, I saw a 42-year-old woman, but her eyes were heavy, as if they had endured a lifetime of waiting, sacrificing, and finally collapsing. I made my way to the kitchen where the smell of baked goods and coffee filled the air. Lucas turned when he saw me and gave me a gentle, warm smile, so tender I had to look away to hide the panic surging inside me. "Good morning, Mom," he said, as if last night had never happened. I gripped the hot coffee cup in my hands, clinging to it like it was something still intact. "Good morning," I replied, my voice so faint it was barely audible. We ate breakfast in silence. Every movement, every stolen glance felt like it was lined with thorns cutting into me. Lucas was different. He was calm, gentle, as if he felt no fear or regret. That unsettled me even more. How could a boy so young remain so composed? After a mistake that I, an adult, couldn't stop torturing myself over. As I cleared the breakfast dishes, Lucas stood up and came closer. The nearness froze me in place. "Mom," he said, using a deep, warm tone I had never heard from him before, "I know you're scared." I tightened my grip on the plate in my hands. "No, Lucas, don't," I whispered, shaking my head. He didn't touch me. He just stood there, patient but unwavering. "I just want you to know," Lucas continued, his eyes piercing through every wall I had tried to build. "I won't force you. I won't do anything. You ... I turned away, unable to bear that gaze. My heart felt crushed. All these years I had longed for someone to truly see me, listen to me, touch me, not as a beautiful wife or a perfect mother, but as myself, Evelyn, a person struggling to find herself again. What was the price of being seen? Was it a burden I could bear? "You better go outside and play," I said, my voice trembling, "so I can clean up." Lucas stayed silent for a moment. Then he nodded gently. "I understand," he said and turned away. When his figure disappeared behind the door, I collapsed onto the cold table. Tears streamed down silently. I had lost the last bit of peace left inside me, and I knew from now on, every day would never feel normal again. That afternoon, the house was engulfed in a heavy silence. David was still busy at the office. Ella was at a friend's house, leaving just Lucas and me, each occupying a separate corner, like strangers trapped in a story that had veered off course. I tried to busy myself, hoping that distraction would erase the persistent tension gnawing inside me. I wiped the tables, rearranged the books, even pulled weeds in the garden. But nothing could make me forget the way Lucas had looked at me that morning. That gaze, it wasn't just youthful longing. There was something deeper, trust, understanding, and a loneliness that mirrored my own. By the time sunset fell, the house seemed coated in a thin dust of unspoken things. I was in the kitchen, fumbling with the dinner no one had asked for when I heard slow footsteps approaching. Lucas. I didn't turn around, but I knew he was standing right behind me. Too close, too intense, like a flame I dared not touch but couldn't retreat from. I drew a deep breath. "Ella will be home soon," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Lucas said nothing. Instead, I felt his warm breath brush against the back of my neck, sending a shiver through me. "I know," he replied, his voice strangely deep and rough. I turned around, determined to put an end to this once and for all. But when I faced him, every prepared word evaporated. Lucas looked at me with nothing hidden. No fear, no hesitation, only raw, suffocating sincerity. "You don't have to pretend to be strong in front of me," he said slowly. "I see you. I've seen you for a long time." I took a step back. "Lucas, this is wrong." "Then why don't you push me away?" he asked, not accusing, just painfully sincere. I froze. That question cut deep because I knew the answer. It wasn't that I lacked reason. It wasn't that I didn't know right from wrong. It was that I had gone so long without being truly seen, truly felt, truly loved for who I was. A silent tear escaped down my cheek. I covered my face as if hiding my eyes could hide the guilt swallowing me whole, but Lucas gently pulled my hands away. "Don't hide anymore," he whispered. In the small kitchen, under the fading light of dusk, Lucas stood beside me quietly, his silent presence offering comfort, a tenderness that made me tremble. I wanted to push him away. I should have pushed him away, but I stood frozen, unable to voice the boundaries I knew were necessary. I stood there deeply moved, recognizing how isolated we both felt, like a drowning soul grasping at the only lifeline left. In that moment, everything I had ever believed in, shattered. All that remained were two people, lonely, broken, standing there emotionally connected in mutual loneliness. We silently understood each other's sadness, as if the world outside no longer had anything left to offer. From that instant, Lucas and I grasped that our bond had grown intricate in ways neither of us had planned. The following day, morning light poured through the kitchen window, highlighting the quiet fragments inside me. Lucas had risen early. He didn't utter a word, just silently prepared me a cup of coffee, placed it on the table, and left, as if fearing that any conversation might further shatter the already delicate space between us. I remained there for a long while, observing the thin steam rising from the cup. A single question echoed in my mind. What had I done? Our connection had shifted, losing the simplicity it once held. We were no longer a family in any genuine sense. We had crossed a boundary that could never be uncrossed. As I sat quietly facing myself, the front door opened. David was back. I abruptly straightened, feeling like a guilty person caught in the act. David entered, his face weary, his shirt still bearing traces of the office. "Hi, honey," he said as usual, completely oblivious, not sensing the oppressive tension filling the house. This is a—" I managed the weakest, most forced smile of my life. "Hi." Lucas descended the stairs and our eyes met briefly. No words were needed. Everything that had transpired the night before hung heavily in the air, raw and painful. David glanced at us, frowning slightly as if sensing something amiss, but quickly dismissed it, as he always did, never noticing, never questioning. "What do you want for dinner tonight?" I inquired, my voice slightly trembling. A trivial question, a desperate attempt to cling to something resembling normalcy. David chuckled softly. "Whatever you like." He wanted to laugh. Whatever I like. If only he knew what I had done in my search for feeling alive again. Would he still say it so easily? Lucas quietly went outside without having breakfast, without saying a word. I stood there, caught between a husband who still believed everything was fine and the growing emptiness inside me. I had lost everything: family, honor, myself. I wanted to believe that time would heal, that somehow things could return to how they were. But deep down, I knew it was impossible. Lucas and I had broken something sacred. Even if we never touched again, the rift would remain irreparable, indelible. Every time I looked at David and Ella, I would remember. Every time Lucas passed me in the hallway, I would remember. Every night, lying beside a husband who no longer truly touched my soul, I would remember. And in the depths of that pain, I realized that sometimes the greatest betrayal isn't to others but to your own heart. I used to think that great wrongdoing came from impulsive decisions, from moments of losing control. But no, sometimes the worst begins with silence, with tiny empty spaces no one bothers to fill. With the endless wait for a gaze that truly sees, a touch that truly comforts. I am not seeking forgiveness. I am not hoping for understanding. I only know that from the moment we silently turned away, when no one truly saw the other anymore, the tragedy had already quietly begun. There are mistakes that cannot be undone. We can only live with them in quiet regret for the rest of our lives. The moment our hands brushed, I realized some doors inside us open quietly and cannot be closed again. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice, one that could destroy everything. I'm Slayer, 42 years old, and what happened between me and someone who had been a part of my family for years still haunts me to this day. When my husband left for another long trip, I thought I'd just feel lonely. I never imagined I'd feel seen or that I would cross a line I could never uncross. Have you ever faced a moment where you knew, even before it happened, that it would change you forever? Tell me your thoughts. I'm ready to hear your truth. I had never imagined my life would take such a quiet turn. A 42-year-old woman standing in the middle of a picture-perfect home yet never had the feeling of being invisible felt so stark. My husband, who once was the center of this world, had now become just a name on a travel itinerary. Business trips stretched from one day to the next, week after week, and his returns felt less like reunions and more like mere acknowledgements of presence. We still spoke, exchanging a few polite words about work, about bills, about the weather. But between us, there was now a gap too wide to bridge. The intimacy, the casual touches, the moments when a glance was enough to understand each other. All of it seemed to belong to another lifetime. I kept the house immaculate, kept the garden on the front porch blooming through the seasons, kept my smile bright and full whenever I met the neighbours. But no one knew that every night when the door was shut, all that remained was a fading version of myself. When my husband informed me that he would be leaving again, this time for nearly a month, I simply smiled and nodded. I didn't question him, didn't plead, didn't resent him. I had grown too used to accepting, or at least I thought I had. There are small cracks we believe will never grow until one day they open wide enough that they can no longer be hidden. And I stood at the edge of that chasm, not knowing that even a gentle breeze would be enough to push me over. A week after my husband left, Liam returned. He was 23 years old, tall, calm, with a smile that still carried a trace of youthful innocence, even though the outlines of maturity had begun to settle on him, something I had never really noticed before. I had cared for Liam since he was just a middle schooler, a gentle but bounded relationship, as if he lived under the same roof, but each kept a sky of our own. This time, something was different. When Liam stepped through the door, pulling a suitcase behind him and his hair tousled from the spring wind, I suddenly felt the house brighten just a little, a warm, vibrant light, the kind of feeling I had forgotten. "Hello, Miss Clare," Liam said, his voice deeper and warmer than I remembered. "Hello, dear," I replied, smiling, trying to hide the sudden awkwardness that came with realizing just how much the young boy before me had grown. We quickly fell back into our familiar rhythm, cooking together, tidying up, watching old movies every night. Small things, but enough to fill the emptiness a little. But in those small moments, I began to notice something changing. Sometimes I caught Liam's gaze lingering longer than usual. A casual brush of hands as we carried dishes to the kitchen made my heart skip a beat. An offhand compliment, "You look beautiful today," left me so flustered I had to turn away, hiding a clumsy smile behind my coffee cup. I told myself, "Don't think anything of it, Claire. It's just the misunderstanding of a lonely woman." But I couldn't deny that those tiny things, whether accidental or intentional, were touching places inside me that had long been left untouched. One late afternoon, as the golden sunset bathed the backyard, Liam sat beside me on the porch steps. "You know," he said, his voice as soft as the breeze, "I've always admired how you keep everything steady, even when no one's around." I looked up at Liam, and in his eyes, I saw something different. Not the naive admiration of a boy, but understanding, appreciation, and a loneliness mirroring my own, searching for someone to recognize it. I felt the walls I had built around myself for so many years suddenly grow thin. I should have looked away. I should have broken the moment with a light joke. But instead, I just sat there, silent, letting myself for the first time in a long while not resist. The sun sank slowly, leaving a tender hush over everything. And in that moment, I knew something had begun, quietly and irreversibly. That night, it rained. The rain came suddenly, pouring onto the roof in a soft, steady murmur like the earth itself was sighing. I was cleaning up the kitchen when the lights flickered a few times before going out completely. A power outage right on the first rainy night of the season. I rummaged through a drawer and found a few small candles. As I was struggling to light them, Liam walked in holding 2 glasses of red wine. "I thought you might need this," Liam said with a smile, his eyes glowing with warmth. I took the glass from him, my hand brushing lightly against his. A simple touch. But in the flickering candlelight, it became something that could no longer be called simple. We sat down in the living room, candles placed on the table, their soft golden light reflecting in Liam's eyes. The rain beat against the window panes, creating a background melody for the growing silence between us. I sipped my wine, trying to appear calm, but inside I could hear the frantic pounding of my own heart. Then Liam spoke, his voice low and sincere. I know I probably shouldn't say this. I turned to look at him, my hand tightening slightly around my glass. But do you know, Liam continued, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever known. Not just because of how you look, but because of the way you exist. Strong, gentle, and yet so achingly. I felt his words in my heart. The one that had felt dry and barren for so many years suddenly ached as if it had been touched for the first time. I wanted to laugh to lighten the mood. I wanted to stand up, make some excuse to leave the room, but instead, I whispered, barely audible, "Thank you, Liam." A full, swelling silence stretched between us. Not awkward, not fearful, but heavy with all the things left unsaid. Liam set his glass down, his eyes never leaving mine. And before my rational mind could intervene, he reached a steady hand, slowly finding mine. I didn't pull away. I let him. That gentle brush, just fingertips meeting, was enough to send a tremor through my entire body, as if the whole universe had shifted. The rain kept falling, filling the silence. Outside, the world went on, unaware that inside that small house, something had quietly taken root. Fragile, forbidden, but undeniable. I knew in that moment that we had crossed an invisible line. One accidental touch, and from there would be no going back. The next morning, the house was steeped in an unfamiliar silence. I woke early, my footsteps light as I made my way to the kitchen, as if afraid to shatter the fragile air still lingering from the night before. The faint morning sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the rainwater still glistening on the wooden floor. I brewed a pot of coffee by hand, my heart twisting as I thought about the way Liam had looked at me last night. Not like a boy admiring a figure from his childhood, but like a man looking at a woman he desired. Soft footsteps echoed behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Liam. "Did you sleep okay?" His voice was slightly hesitant, carrying the weight of a night filled with restless thoughts. I nodded, lying to both him and myself. "Yeah, well, enough." We sat across from each other at the dining table, the coffee cups untouched between us. The air was so thick it could be felt with every breath. I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, asking Liam about his summer plans, about his studies. He answered politely, but those eyes, they stayed the same, still looking at me as if I were the only thing that existed in the room. And I began to crave that gaze in a way that scared me. That afternoon, a sudden downpour returned. I stood by the window, watching the raindrops race down the glass. My mind tangled in a fierce, restless struggle. Liam approached, standing just behind me. I could feel his warmth so close that if I leaned back even slightly, we would touch. "Miss Claire," he whispered so softly. It was almost just a breath against my ear. I've never seen anyone look so beautifully sad. I turned around, meaning to make a joke to lighten the heavy atmosphere. But when I looked into Liam's eyes, the words caught in my throat, like we stood so close that I could feel my heartbeat echoing between the sliver of space left between us. I should have stepped back. I had to step back. But instead, I closed my eyes and surrendered to the deep yearning to be seen, truly seen for who I was beyond the years of silence. Liam's hand brushed mine, a silent, wordless moment where two lonelinesses briefly recognized each other. I answered by leaning into him. The moment between us was filled with hesitation and emotion, a fragile breaking point where the walls we built could no longer hold, fierce and desperate, as if we were trying to fill all the years of loneliness, restraint, and forgotten longing. In that moment, I no longer felt invisible. I was simply a woman, seen, remembered, alive. We pulled away from each other, breathless, overwhelmed by what had just happened. I took a shaky step back. "We shouldn't," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I know," he just nodded. But his eyes, those eyes stayed locked on mine, tethering me with an invisible string. I knew no matter how hard I tried, I would never be able to break it. That evening passed in silence. Liam and I avoided each other as if even a single glance would be enough to shatter everything, to sweep away the last fragile boundary still left between us. I sat curled up in the living room, a thin blanket draped loosely over my shoulders. Outside, the rain kept falling heavily, each drop tapping against the windows like it was hammering at the growing unease. Inside me, Liam came down from upstairs, slow and hesitant. He sat on the chair across from me, the space between us just wide enough to restrain and just narrow enough to ache for more. No one spoke. Only the sound of rain, the wind, and the erratic pounding of my heart filled the room. At last, Liam broke the silence. His voice was low, rough. "I'm sorry. I should have had more self-control." I clutched the blanket tighter around me, my heart twisting painfully. "No," I whispered. It wasn't just you." The words escaped before I could even think. I didn't want to place blame. I couldn't pretend I was innocent. Liam's eyes met mine, not with the impulsiveness of a young boy, but with the gaze of a man who fully owned his actions. "I don't want you to feel guilty," Liam continued, his hands clenching over his knees. "But I can't pretend nothing happened. I can't go back to the way it was." I bit my lip, feeling the pain rise in my chest. I understood he was right. I couldn't either. I had crossed a line I once swore I would never even approach. But at the same time, for the first time in years, I had truly felt alive, instead of quietly existing next to a man who had long since stopped seeing me. I took a deep breath, searching inside myself for some shred of reason still left. "You'll be going back to school soon," I said, my voice trembling slightly. They'll return to normal." Liam stayed silent. He nodded, but his eyes betrayed him, full of a sadness so deep it squeezed my heart. "Can we pretend nothing ever happened?" he asked, almost a whisper. I looked at him and I knew I couldn't lie. "No," I whispered back. "We can never go back. Not because of the kiss, not because of the clumsy touches, but because we had seen each other in a place so deep that no one else had ever tried to reach." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the endless rainfall, wondering where my life would drift after tonight. Liam didn't sleep either. I heard his quiet footsteps pacing the hallway, stopping right outside my door. He didn't open it. He just stood there like a silent apology, a wordless regret. I hugged myself, tears streaming down my face, unstoppable. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I only knew we had lost the old peace, and neither of us, neither Liam nor I, could ever turn back. The next morning I woke up to a house filled with an uncanny silence. The rain had stopped. Only streaks of water clung to the windows, reflecting the dull grey sky. I walked down to the kitchen, following the familiar habit of making myself a cup of coffee. The warmth from the mug seeped into my palms, but it wasn't enough to chase away the cold curling tightly inside my chest. Liam had been up early. He was sitting on the porch steps, his suitcase packed and waiting beside him. I stood by the window, watching him, my heart tightening painfully. There were no goodbyes gentle enough for a parting like this. No way to wipe clean everything that had happened. When I stepped outside, Liam looked up. "I'll go now," his voice caught in his throat. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I know everything will be harder after today," Liam continued, each word carving itself into the heavy morning air. "But I will never forget what it felt like to really see you." I bit my lip, fighting back the tears threatening to spill. "Thank you," I whispered, "for reminding me that I'm still someone who can feel." We stood there in the small yard, bathed in weak sunlight, silently holding each other's gaze. No hugs, no promises, because we both knew some of the most beautiful things are the ones that can never be named. When the taxi carrying Liam disappeared beyond the line of trees, I turned back into the house feeling as if a part of me had left with him. All that remained were the empty rooms and the memory of someone who had made me remember I was still capable of love, even if only for a fleeting moment. 2 days later, my husband returned from his business trip. He walked into the house with a souvenir bag in hand and a tired smile on his face. "I got you some chocolates at the airport," he said, placing the bag on the table. I smiled mechanically and watched as he busied himself with his luggage, his phone, his schedule. He didn't notice the change in my eyes. He didn't see that I was different. He didn't realize that my heart had stopped waiting for him a long time ago, longer than the months he had been away. That evening, we had dinner together, just like before, silent, polite, empty. And in that silence, I understood that my life would continue, but it would never be the same again. I had touched something no one could ever take back, the feeling of being seen, of being touched, of living true to myself. And even if I had to endure this loneliness for the rest of my life, I would not forget. I would not forget Liam, would not forget myself, would not forget that there had been a time when my heart had awakened, even if the price for it was a lifetime of silent memory. The day Liam truly left wasn't just the moment he stepped off that porch, it was when his final message appeared on my phone. "Please take care of yourself. Don't forget you are worthy of being loved." I read and reread those words, my hands trembling, my heart crammed with emotions I couldn't voice. I knew we couldn't stay in contact. We couldn't maintain anything of that fragile yet fierce bond because its very existence, no matter how beautiful, could only survive in silence and regret. I sat on the chair in the living room, the spacious, elegant, and utterly empty room. My husband was busy planning his next trip. He still didn't notice that my eyes had changed. Didn't see the quiet shattering I struggled to hide beneath the shell of the obedient wife. I tapped my fingers lightly on the table, my gaze drifting toward the window where the garden flowers had begun to wither under the late sun. The feeling of loss needed no witness. It gnawed away silently from within, piece by piece, breath by breath. And the cruelest part was I couldn't blame anyone. I couldn't blame Liam. I couldn't blame my husband. I couldn't blame age, loneliness, or endless business trips. I could only blame myself for allowing hope to slip in. Maybe what Liam and I shared had always been just a moment of being lost, a fragile beam of light in a long, lonely night. No more Liam, no more hesitant touches, no more eyes that saw through me like no one ever had, only me facing myself alone. And this time, I wasn't afraid, because even though my heart had cracked, I knew I would never again become the woman who quietly faded away in this house. I had awakened and no one, not even myself, could take that away. It's just like the worst thing was losing the person you loved. But now I understand. The deeper pain is losing yourself in someone else's forgetting. Liam is gone, but what he left behind is an awakening. I no longer live just to exist. I will learn to fill the empty spaces with my own courage, and this time, I won't let anyone, not even loneliness itself, make me disappear ever again.